Warning: do not watch on an empty stomach and make sure your fridge is well stocked.
Seeing Rurin begin to transform into a dragon, Ellison hastily yelled, "It's a misunderstanding." Really? She was already tied up like this from the start. I didn't do it. Besides, if we keep talking like this, aren't you worried we'll get discovered? All our efforts to infiltrate this place will go to waste. Hearing Ellison's shout, Rurin seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. Understanding what was more important at the moment, she remained silent for a bit, then growled, "Investigate the cultivation room. We'll talk about this later. And you better be ready." With that, the communication magic abruptly ended. Ellison, witnessing this, sighed in relief as if a great burden had been lifted, narrowly escaping disaster for now. However, Rurin's magical fluctuation had alerted a nearby guard. He approached and shouted, "What are you doing in there?" Still facing the wall, Rurin focused on erasing the magic circle she had just created. Then, she slowly turned around and replied, "Nothing. The handcuffs broke. I need a new pair." With a face full of irritation, she added, the guard, puzzled as to how Rurin had shattered the cuffs, received her cold response. "They were defective, not my doing." This conversation caught the attention of two figures observing from above, Reedon and Venarto. Venarto suggested, "Shall we interrogate her?" But Reedon dismissed it. "No need. And tell the guard not to provoke her anymore. She's not human." After some contemplation, Reedon still couldn't figure out Rurin's purpose. Yet, the presence of such a powerful being could interfere with his plans. So he decided to set it aside and focus on more pressing matters. After a turbulent night, dawn broke over the city of Dedran. Ricardo, with the calm and cheerful demeanor of a loyal butler, opened the door and greeted Ellison, inquiring about the gift he had sent the previous day. Though Ellison responded politely, he was still somewhat annoyed, feeling slightly betrayed by the test. However, after the events of the previous night, those thoughts had mostly faded. Deep down, though, Ellison harbored lingering anger toward Ricardo for nearly causing a grave misunderstanding that he wasn't sure how he would resolve once he returned home. As he thought about what awaited him, a fierce dragon like Rurin, ready to tear him apart for what she had seen, Ellison shuddered at the idea of facing her again. After a few words of apology and some small talk, Ellison asked to keep the female slave sent the previous night, mentioning his fondness for her. Naturally, this request didn't bother Ricardo. Suddenly, Ellison took a sip of tea and moved to the real subject. "This isn't the first time I've seen slaves. But something seems different about her. She's strange." This comment made Ricardo smile slightly as he replied, "Ah, you've noticed. That's what makes the items from Dedran so unique." "Exactly. A slave that obeys unconditionally because she's been brainwashed. We don't have to worry about them escaping or betraying us. On top of that, they'll follow your every order, no matter what you ask. Who could refuse such an offer?" Ricardo's face lit up with enthusiasm as he talked about the matter. While Ellison felt increasingly uncomfortable, he thought that Ricardo had truly rotted from within. Ellison decided to not only uncover the source of the poison but also destroy the slave trade market. "So," he continued to ask, "so, you're planning to expand the slave trade, correct? With high-quality merchandise and my noble title as account. You want to combine both to create a potential trade route within the empire, right?" Ricardo smiled slightly and replied, "It seems siding with you was the right choice." After taking a sip of tea, Ellison calmly continued, "But before that, I'd like to confirm a few things. These slaves, are they connected to a place called the cultivation chamber?" This question left Ricardo visibly shocked, not understanding how Ellison knew about this. Ellison nonchalantly answered, "I've heard rumors about Dedran and about the nobles. Nobles are often very cautious. So I need clear confirmation to make proper arrangements. If you can't do that, then don't show me anything. The business deal will have to be put on hold." Hearing this, Ricardo smiled and affirmed, "We're partners now, so there's nothing to hide. The place you mentioned is closer than you think." The scene transitions to another part of the castle, where Reedon knocks and enters a room. Inside, a red-haired woman is holding a smoking pipe. "Oh, This woman looks like the red dragon that killed Serena's former lover. Reedon remarked. It seems we have a slightly troublesome issue on our side. The red dragon appeared intrigued, smiling as she asked, "Wow, I never thought someone who didn't blink when facing the Imperial army would have such a reaction." "What's the problem?" Reedon replied. "There's a peculiar creature among the slaves. Though I'm not sure because she quickly masked her energy. I suspect she's a dragonkin like you." Sydney. The scene shifts to a place called the cultivation chamber, where magic circles surrounded the area. The workers were actually slaves, tending to various herbs and potions. Ricardo and Ellison, wearing masks, stepped into the area, while Ricardo eagerly explained the place. Looking around, Ellison was astonished. "I didn't expect them to hide so many light-based magic circles beneath the estate. And these slaves don't seem to be in good shape. All these herbs are toxic. And when they can't take it anymore, they're loaded onto carts and taken away for disposal." Ellison asked Ricardo about the materials. "So, these are the ingredients that can create undetectable poisons?" Ricardo chuckled, interested in another product. "Are you? I was about to show you this." As he spoke, he reached into his coat to retrieve something, but a cold voice interrupted him. "Steward Ricardo." The speaker was none other than Reedon, the overseer of the slave trade. He continued, "What brings you here?" Seeing Reedon, Ricardo excitedly spoke up. "Ah, Lord Reedon, apologies for the late introduction. This is Count Rivik, who will be joining our side." But before Ricardo could finish his sentence, a flash of light exploded. Reedon's sword moved with lightning speed, slashing across Ricardo's neck as he coldly remarked, "You fool, letting a newcomer learn all of this." Ricardo's body collapsed to the ground, falling silent forever. At the same moment, the magical protection around the cultivation chamber flared violently, flames shooting everywhere, consuming everything in sight. Facing Ellison, Reedon spoke. "My apologies, Count, but I'm not convinced you'll join our side. Perhaps killing you first would be the safer option." Ellison forcefully removed his mask and replied, "Your suspicion is correct." In another underground area, where Rurin was being held captive, she was lost in thought about the events that had transpired when a voice suddenly rang out. "Wow, really? I thought Reedon had made a mistake. A dragonkin slave, looks like I've struck gold." The voice belonged to a woman just as strikingly beautiful as Serena. Rurin extremely calm and responded, "I didn't expect to meet a dragonkin in a place like this." "Who are you? You don't know me, but I know all about you." Sydney answered. "Rurin, daughter of Varen." Hearing her mother's name, Rurin was visibly shocked and asked, "How do you know my mother's name?" Sydney sneered and replied, "I don't just know your mother's name, I know exactly when she took her last breath." As she spoke, Sydney licked her lips with a ravenous expression. This statement seemed to strike a deep, forbidden chord within Rurin. She slowly stood up and muttered, "Good thing Ellison isn't here. If he were, he'd probably try to convince me to give you a chance to survive." As she spoke, Rurin's body erupted with massive magical power. Dragon wings sprouted from her back. Light engulfed the area, and the prison bars shattered. Rurin had fully transformed. Yes, folks, our girl, who had refused to appear in her dragon form for some unknown reason, has finally broken her own rule. She reverted to her true form, a ferocious, powerful black dragon. "I'm going to tear you apart, piece by piece, and leave only your mouth intact. Let's see if you can regenerate after that." But instead of panicking in the face of Rurin's fearsome transformation, Sydney remained unfazed. She too began to transform, smiling as she replied, "Why don't you give it a try? And for the record, your mother did talk quite a bit, I mean, before she died." Upon hearing this, Rurin's rage boiled over. She roared, "Shut up!" as a massive dragon's breath erupted from her mouth, surging straight towards Sydney. After Rurin unleashed her dragon's breath, a brilliant light enveloped the entire area. Its destructive force bored a massive, deep hole into the corner of the underground chamber, engulfing it in magical flames. The terrified guards fell back, screaming in panic. When they looked again, they finally realized the truth and shouted, "A dragon! Run for your lives!" Everyone fled in a frenzy. For the legendary creature that had caused catastrophe during the last war had truly appeared. As Rurin remained enraged, a voice echoed, "Angry now? How arrogant! A mere slave dares to act recklessly in here?" Along with the voice came a blazing red light from above the chamber, crashing down with immense power. Rurin quickly spread her wings and dodged. Above her, Sydney had fully transformed into a crimson dragon. Facing Rurin from above, "Why are you wandering around here? Shouldn't you be back in Grake? Playing house with that man you brought along? Why didn't you just keep living that peaceful little life?" Rurin raised her head and roared in fury, "Because your stench reeked all the way here." Then, she charged upwards toward Sydney. The two dragons clashed, lunging at each other in a fierce battle. On the battlefield, flames from the protective magic circles had set the herbs ablaze. The guards screamed, "Fire! Put out the fire!" But Reedon coolly and indifferently remarked, "No need, let's go." At that moment, Ellison unexpectedly conjured an ice spell that blanketed the entire area, extinguishing the flames completely. "If it all burns, we'll lose the evidence," Ellison remarked. Reedon wasn't surprised, replying softly, "Just as I thought. You're not an official, you're a mage. I knew there was something unusual about you." Ellison casually scratched his ear and said, "Are you talking about me?" As he spoke, he summoned a magical shield, deflecting the sword aura that Reedon had sent his way. Impressed by Ellison's shield, Reedon commented, "Your shield is quite impressive." Ellison replied, "When you suddenly attacked me, I recognized from your second strike that you're using the swordsmanship of the First Knight's Order." This statement made Reedon freeze for a moment. Ellison continued, "You're from the Royal Palace, aren't you?" Reedon responded, "You're becoming more interesting, but also far too dangerous." As he spoke, Reedon swiftly drew his sword, unleashing a powerful wave of sword aura aimed directly at Ellison's protective magic circle. But Ellison had already created 3 high-level magical circles to bind Reedon. However, Reedon easily evaded the binding magic and said, "This kind of binding spell is easy to dodge if you can see the flow of magic." Reedon advanced while Ellison continued to retreat. The two circled each other, Reedon launching sword auras, and Ellison blocking with strong magic. Their powers clashed repeatedly, but neither gained the upper hand. Reedon suddenly crouched, preparing to unleash a more powerful sword technique, firing it directly at Ellison and causing a massive explosion. Yet, when the light of the explosion faded, Ellison stood unharmed, protected by an incredibly sturdy magical shield. As he defended himself, Ellison thought, "This isn't the skill level of a first-class knight." Meanwhile, Reedon pressed his attack, saying, "The wider a defensive spell, the weaker it becomes, especially when you focus all your attacks on a single point." His eyes glowed, and he gripped his sword tighter, channeling energy to unleash a fierce sword aura that struck directly at Ellison's magical shield. At last, a large crack appeared in the shield, but inside, Ellison calmly responded, "Theoretically, you're right, you certainly know how to kill a mage. But, this ends here." Ellison burst out of the magical circle, conjuring a powerful purple spell, launching it straight at Reedon's abdomen with such speed that he couldn't react in time. Reedon was sent flying, crashing hard onto the ground, his clothes torn to shreds. However, he still rose to his feet, completely unfazed, and said, "You're strong." Surprised, Ellison slowly approached, clapping his hands, and said, "Getting up so quickly? Impressive resilience. I wasn't trying to kill you. But, what are you?" As Ellison got a clearer view of Reedon's form, he was stunned. "What are you?" At that moment, Reedon's eyes had turned completely black, no longer resembling those of a human. His body was without a single scratch. "What is this body?" Ellison exclaimed in shock. Scene shift to the Grand Mage's restaurant. "Your Highness." "No, young master, I have arrived." The one speaking was the deputy captain of the Royal Knights, who had just stepped through the door of the restaurant. "As per your request, you must already know his true identity." At this moment, the Crown Prince had just finished his meal and, sitting beside the empty plate, he replied, "You must already know his true identity." The crown prince was dining with Medrin and the Baroness of Grake. While the Baroness trembled in confusion, unsure why the crown prince was there, Medrin cheerfully enjoyed her meal. Noting the absence of Ellison or Rurin from the restaurant, the crown prince spoke gently, though with a sharp edge. You must already know my true identity by now. Since I've been here for a few days, I've finally been discovered. Baroness, as I explained before, I did not come here to apprehend you. So, you may leave. His voice dripped with mockery, the tone of a noble delivering both a threat and command. This statement sent the Baroness into a panic. She stammered, repeatedly insisting she had no involvement in Count Dedrin's affairs. Yet, she seemed to forget that no one could simply capture someone in Grake. Especially those connected to the world's most powerful Grand Mage, Ellison. After the Baroness hurriedly fled, the deputy captain of the Royal Knights pulled out a chair and sat down. Remarking, "The restaurant is still open even though Ellison isn't here?" The Crown Prince smiled as he replied, "Ah, there's a rather capable farm manager who's quite the cook. Boiled wooba, wasn't it? It's quite delicious. And what about Dedrin?" The Crown Prince shifted back to the main topic. The deputy captain responded, "He hasn't said a word. It's likely because he's in deep shock after seeing his castle destroyed." The Crown Prince pondered for a moment before asking, "Let me ask you a silly question. If you and Ellison were to fight, without considering rank, who would win?" Upon hearing this question, both Medrin and the deputy captain of the Royal Knights spat out the food in their mouths. The deputy captain shouted in disbelief, "Your Highness, what are you saying?" The Crown Prince quickly clarified, "I'm serious. Answer me." The deputy captain regained his composure, coughed lightly, and responded, "I don't understand why you would ask such a ridiculous question. But I would never win. Even with Medrin's help." The Crown Prince, deep in thought, murmured, "He's that strong? He's a monster beyond comprehension." Before the Crown Prince could continue, the deputy captain interjected, "However, I know of another person just as powerful. There's still someone in this world whose strength rivals Ellison's." The Crown Prince was stunned. "What?" The deputy captain continued, "A great master. A genius who redefined the swordsmanship of the First Knight Order, Commander Aaron Pierce. A legend. I've never seen a swordsman as versatile as him. He's the reason I'm still just the deputy commander." The Crown Prince sighed. "The commander of the First Knight Order. But I'm talking about the living. Didn't he disappear at the start of the war? It would seem that Reedon, the human trafficker, is none other than Aaron Pierce, the former commander of the Order of the First Knights and the strongest knight on the continent, who, for unknown reasons, deserted and joined the Dragon Clan." Back to the battle in the cultivation room, Aaron Pierce spoke. "What's your name?" "Mage, Ellison." "Ellison? You're the deserter, Ellison." Ellison was visibly surprised that Aaron Pierce knew so much about him. Even though during the war with the Dragon Clan, Aaron had never appeared, he had vanished long before that. Ellison shifted the topic and asked, "With a body like that, I have quite a few questions for you, but I'll have to hear them from you in a cell." As he spoke, Ellison created a magical circle on his finger, weaving in various spells. However, Aaron Pierce seemed uninterested. He casually swung his sword, unleashing a fiery slash, and responded, "That'll be hard because I'm busy. Let's meet next time, Ellison." Aaron slashed two X-shaped strikes into the ceiling of the basement, causing it to collapse, and said, "Don't you want to protect those innocent slaves and the evidence? What a shame. If I had friends like you around, maybe I would have walked a different path." Ellison watched the rocks fall from the ceiling, bidding farewell with a tinge of regret. Perhaps there was more to Aaron's story than we imagined, a fascinating, powerful character. It seemed Ellison would have to face this villain many more times in the future. Meanwhile, at the battlefield of the two dragons, Rurin had returned to her human form, wiping a small scratch from her cheek, standing opposite the red-black dragon that had been slammed into the wall. The dragon was heavily injured, missing an arm and one of its wings, but it stubbornly continued to taunt. "I told you before, she talked too much." On the other side, Rurin slowly approached, speaking in a cold tone. "Tell me, what do you know about my mother?" The red dragon, Sydney responded calmly. Despite the worsening injuries, you think I don't know? No secret stays hidden forever. For example, your mother created the ancient dragonstone and was imprisoned for it. Oh, and she died horribly in that cell, with no one coming to her aid. In the end, the ancient stone is... Before Sydney could finish, a powerful blue spell shot straight into her head. Rurin turned away, furious, and muttered, "Why don't you keep babbling?" Behind her lay the decapitated body of the red dragon. Sydney. As Rurin walked away, she continued, "If the secret's out, I'll just kill everyone who knows." It seems the previous discussion between Elder Metadonna of the Dragon Clan, Rurin, and Ellison about the possibility of other ancient dragonstones, besides the 3 that Ellison had absorbed, was not far from the truth. Because Ellison is human, this theory still holds. There's also speculation that Rurin might have absorbed an ancient dragonstone herself, which could allow her to become a new dragon lord. Thus, there are now around 4 ancient dragonstones in existence, 3 held by Ellison and 1 potentially by Rurin. However, Rurin's possession of a stone remains a theory for now. Let's continue following the story to uncover the truth. After the fierce battle between Ellison and Raiden in the basement, Ellison immediately cast a protective barrier to prevent the entire structure from collapsing. The shield enveloped the entire basement, suspending debris in mid-air, safeguarding everyone trapped inside. The workers below, still in a state of panic, mistook Ellison for Lord Rivik and began to thank him profusely. Despite the misunderstanding, Ellison simply smiled and encouraged them, advising them to leave the dangerous area as quickly as possible. As the group began evacuating, they stumbled upon the corpse of Ricardo, the man they had long despised. Their long-repressed anger exploded, and they rushed forward, trampling his body while cursing and venting their hatred. Then, one of them suddenly remembered Ellison's presence and paused, feeling a bit guilty about acting so violently in front of their savior. However, Ellison, with his usual innocent expression, nodded and said, "Do as you please, it's fine." His unexpected remark brought laughter to the group, lightening the mood, and they quickly continued toward the exit before the basement collapsed. The scene shifted to the Lord's castle. A maid noticed the unusual trembling of the building and was terrified, not knowing what was happening, especially with her master still in the basement. Amidst her panic, a mysterious figure cloaked in black suddenly appeared. She nervously asked who he was, but he casually replied, "I heard there's a patient here." Before she could react, he lightly waved his hand, and she collapsed to the ground, unconscious. It seemed to be a form of hypnosis or sleep magic. The stranger continued deeper into the castle, heading straight for Ellison's room, where the slave girl had been resting since the previous night. Elsewhere in the basement, Rurin was observing the situation. With a light pull, she broke the iron framework of the prison cells. In a cold voice, she commanded, "No more guards are here. Run." But the slaves, affected by neuro-inhibiting poison, remained unresponsive. They were like soulless bodies, unable to escape. Rurin didn't know what to do until a familiar voice spoke up. Ellison had arrived. Though slightly uneasy about their earlier misunderstanding, he teased, "You said there was an intruder, but it seems like you've already destroyed everything here, haven't you?" Rurin coldly retorted, "I had no choice. A dragon found out who I am, and it's lying over there." She pointed toward the headless dragon's corpse. Ellison pondered for a moment, surveying the scene before him. Rurin's strength was truly terrifying. Not only was she ruthless, but she also fought with a chilling coldness. However, what she said next made him genuinely concerned. That's not the main issue. The dragon knew that my mother created the ancient dragon stone, and I've absorbed it. At that moment, the secret that had been hinted at before was finally confirmed. There were a total of 4 ancient dragon stones, instead of the 3 as previously believed. Ellison had absorbed 3, becoming someone with the power of a dragon lord. Rurin possessed the 4th, making her an overwhelmingly powerful figure in her race. Realizing the growing complexity of the situation, Ellison scratched his head and sighed. "It seems like I found the source of the poison. We need to end this here. What about those people? They're brainwashed and only respond to their master. Those poor slaves. The poison must be unbearable. Despite the dire situation, Ellison remained calm, having already prepared a solution. He called upon the golden dragon Erumantium, who cast a large-scale neural magic. In an instant, all the slaves were freed from the neuro-inhibiting effects. Regaining their consciousness and realizing they had been kidnapped, tears of joy flowed as they celebrated their liberation. Meanwhile, Ellison clapped his hands loudly and said, "Everyone gather around, we've prepared hot food for all of you." The group of slaves eagerly gathered to receive their portions. But instead of luxurious or complicated dishes, they were given simple bowls of instant ramen, the Korean kind that could be prepared in just a few minutes with hot water. The steaming bowls provided a much-needed comfort after their long days of oppression. Simple as it was, in that moment, the instant ramen became the best meal they had ever tasted. As for me, I don't really like the taste of Korean instant ramen. I prefer the various instant noodle brands from Vietnam. Ellison stood from a distance, smiling gently at everyone. After everything that had happened, perhaps a bit of warmth and peace from a hot instant noodle bowl was the most precious thing. While everyone was joyfully enjoying the feast, a rare occasion after long days of imprisonment and slavery, in a dark corner, the body of the red dragon that Rurin had just defeated began to show strange signs. Bit by bit, the massive body shrank, then gradually disappeared into a faint mist, dissolving into the air unnoticed by anyone. As usual, Rurin always ran towards Ellison whenever there was a new dish. She was about to speak. But Ellison smiled and said first, "Here's your portion." It was a light and familiar moment between the two. But outside, that peace was about to be torn apart. The group remained engrossed in their conversation, unaware of the shadow silently approaching. From a distance, Erumantium, the golden dragon, approached slowly, with a heavy and quiet demeanor. He quietly looked at his hands, the hands that had long been seen as hideous and ugly by others. Memories of a painful past flooded back, of the times he had been rejected by women. The emotional scars that couldn't be erased. For a long time, it was his insecurity that had driven Erumantium into darkness, leading him to kidnap women in hopes of making them his wives. But deep down, he longed for one simple thing: love. Now, things seemed different. He recalled the moment the Lord of Grake's family had clasped his hand, crying and thanking him for saving their father. Even the slave girl in Ellison's room, after being freed from brainwashing, had cried, grasped Erumantium's hand, and thanked him sincerely from the bottom of her heart. The hands that had once been stained by guilt now held new meaning. Symbolizing redemption and hope, Erumantium clenched his hands tightly, then walked resolutely out of the underground chamber. The light ahead seemed to guide him toward a better future. A rebirth of both body and soul. Life is strange. It can turn a person from evil to good, and vice versa. Destiny, in truth, stems from thought, mindset, and the surrounding circumstances. Though difficult to understand, life is always a miracle. After leaving the dungeon, the group returned to the Grand Mage's restaurant in a quiet night. Ellison sat on the bed, exhaling a sigh of relief, and began telling Rurin about Erumantium, a person with the ability to completely remove brainwashing. He had come to Dedran to heal the enslaved girl. As soon as Rurin heard this, her eyes widened in realization, her voice filled with threat. "I just remembered something. And you will pay for it." Ellison broke into a cold sweat, panicking, but before he could comprehend what was happening, Rurin lunged at him. Instead of attacking, she unexpectedly hugged him tightly. Her face flushed red. The sudden action left Ellison frozen, unsure how to react. "You have to pay, by hugging me," Rurin muttered, her shy demeanor completely contrasting with the fierce image she had shown while facing the red dragon. Rurin didn't want to attack Ellison, she only wanted to hold him close, ensuring that no other girl could capture his heart. To her, Ellison was everything. Ellison smiled, hurriedly embracing her and said, all right. The small dragon girl, blushing, added shyly, "Don't do that again, Ellison," with a mischievous grin, half joked. "If this is punishment, I wouldn't mind receiving it a few more times." Immediately, anger flared up again on Rurin's face. But before she could react, Ellison quickly diverted her attention. He asked Rurin about the red dragon's body, wondering if she had taken care of it to keep the crown prince from seeing it. Rurin, surprised, replied, "I didn't do that." Rurin, clearly astonished, responded that she had never done such a thing. This made Ellison begin to feel uneasy, as his instincts warned him that something was wrong, that a dangerous storm was approaching. And he was right. In a distant place within the city of Dedran, a figure stood tall amidst the shadows, Sydney, the red dragon, the true form of the creature that Rurin had defeated earlier. In Sydney's hand, a swirling red mana was gathering, slowly converging from the remnants of the clone she had lost. That clone, after being decapitated in the battle, had dissolved into a faint mist and returned to its master. As she recovered her mana, Sydney pondered, "Is this the limit of a clone that only used half my power?" In a cold tone, Sydney addressed Raiden Pierce, the captain of the First Order of Knights, who stood behind her. "And what about you, Raiden?" Raiden, with a calm expression, replied, "My apologies, Ellison is too strong." Hearing this, Sydney burst into loud, raspy laughter that echoed through the dark night. "This is the first time I've heard someone call a human strong." How amusing. However, there was no surprise in Sydney's eyes. In truth, her cunning nature had already anticipated part of this. "Forget it," Sydney said, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon where her plans were slowly unfolding. "You should have told me about Ellison sooner. It seems we'll need to adjust our grand plan." In Sydney's mind, fleeting thoughts of a greater scheme flickered. The grand plan. A plan that the Red Dragon clan had been quietly preparing for a long time. The slavery plot was merely a small part, a minor link in a much larger picture. The Red Dragon clan is preparing to stir this world once again. Back at the Grand Mage's restaurant, the Crown Prince and the Deputy Captain of the First Order Knights were sitting together, drinking tea and discussing the recent events. The Deputy Captain spoke first. "The more I think about it, the more absurd it seems. It's not just about creating poison, but also the treatment of those slaves and the creation of that brainwashing drug. It's beyond imagination." The Crown Prince, with a calm expression and a faint smile, replied, "You're right." He took a small sip of tea, lost in thought. The Crown Prince hadn't expected Ellison to handle the situation so quickly and effortlessly. At that moment, Elle brought over the dessert and asked, "Does the Crown Prince have any more business to attend to in Grake?" The Crown Prince, now dressed formally, admitted that he still had some issues to hand over and address. As the conversation continued, the Crown Prince expressed his surprise upon learning that the main culprit was a dragon, and the accomplice was a knight from the First Order Knights. The dragon's body had disappeared, and Ellison speculated that the dragon might still be alive. He also informed the concerned parties that the incident involved Imperial territory and advised the Crown Prince not to rashly get involved in matters related to dragons. With the practiced smile of a seasoned politician, the Crown Prince responded, "Of course, I have no intention of dying early. Let's end this matter here." When Ellison suggested sending a proper overseer, the Crown Prince confidently pulled out a document and said, "I knew you'd say that. But there's no need for an overseer anymore." As he spoke, the Crown Prince handed the document to Ellison. After carefully reading it, Ellison suddenly became shocked and asked, "Is this the plan the Crown Prince had prepared from the start?" The Crown Prince, with lifeless eyes but still wearing his usual smile, replied, "You're bringing up issues that could easily be misunderstood. Pushing someone directly would cause trouble. If other nobles received this letter, they'd bow immediately. But that's true of other nobles. Here, things aren't so certain." At Grake Castle, the Lord was trying to explain that his wife had no involvement in the incident in Dedran. The Crown Prince, slightly irritated, spoke up, "I didn't come here for that." The Deputy Captain of the First Order Knights also denied it. "I'm not here to arrest anyone either. Read this missive." The Lord of Grake, trembling slightly, took the letter. After reading it carefully, he was left speechless in shock. When the lady of the castle asked what had happened, the Crown Prince slowly turned and began walking away, talking about how the Lord of Dedran had been arrested. He praised Grake for its stable security and reduced poverty rates. Then announced that the central government had decided to merge Dedren with Grake. The rule over Dedren would be entrusted to the Lord of Grake. Upon hearing this, everyone was stunned, while the Crown Prince congratulated the Lord on the expansion of his territory. The Lord of Grake fell into deep thought. After a while, he declined the offer to take over Dedren. The Crown Prince, utterly perplexed, stammered, "Why, isn't this good news?" The Lord of Grake smiled and replied, "I said I wouldn't take it, but I will nominate someone who can manage it better than I can." The Crown Prince and the Vice Captain of the First Order Knights returned to the capital. Along the way, the Crown Prince couldn't stop thinking about the unexpected response from the Lord of Grake. He had hoped that with the recent document, he could strengthen his relationship with the Lord. But the plan had taken a different turn. Nevertheless, the Crown Prince had achieved his necessary goal, as the person taking over Dedren was none other than Diren, the pseudo-disciple of Ellison, the strongest Archmage in the world. This outcome was far more advantageous than giving Dedren to the Lord of Grake, as it would significantly strengthen ties with Ellison. At this moment, the young Diren entered his father's room, smiling brightly as he greeted him. "Father, did you call me?" The Lord of Grake smiled, inviting his son inside while still holding a plate of sweets, a dessert he had been preparing for his wife. The two of them sat down, eating and chatting about the Lord's health, and they didn't forget to express their gratitude to Elena, the elf doctor from the village. The conversation eventually shifted to the good news Diren had heard, that Dedren would be merged into Grake. Upon hearing his son mention this, the Lord fell silent for a moment, then unexpectedly asked about Diren's age. It turned out that the boy was already 17. Of course, when Ellison had arrived, Diren was still a 15-year-old boy, crying his eyes out, but within just 2 years, he had become a young man. The Lord continued, 17 already. For a noble, this is the age to get married. Have you found anyone you like yet? You should start preparing for marriage. This statement caused Diren's face to flush red, and he stammered, "Is something serious happening, Father?" The Lord calmly replied, "I think it's time for an heir. I've already sent a notice to the palace. Now, you will be in charge of managing Dedren." This sudden announcement left Diren utterly stunned. Why had the conversation shifted from marriage to governing a vast territory? Nobles and politicians always loved to talk in circles. Before Diren could regain his composure, the Lord continued, "While I was bedridden, you visited my room and expressed many concerns for the domain. Those weren't just idealistic dreams, they were practical and effective ideas. I heard everything." Hearing his father's praise, Diren bowed his head in embarrassment, insisting that they were just minor things. Lord Raiden Grake took his son's hand, smiling kindly, and said gently, "From now on, as the legitimate Lord of Dedren, you will be able to carry out all the ideas you've had." Diren was still in shock at the sudden and weighty responsibility. The Lord added, "Diren, I'm certain you'll be a much better Lord than I ever could be." His father's encouraging words affirmed Diren's talent and ability. Now, he could no longer be called the boy, but rather, the Lord of Dedren. Overcome with emotion at his father's words, Diren bit his lip, his eyes welling with tears. However, he quickly wiped them away, returning to his confident demeanor. Placing a hand over his heart, he responded firmly, "I understand, Father. I will ensure that Dedren flourishes with my own hands." The scene then shifted to Dedren City. It was a gloomy night, with dilapidated houses and streets filled with dark, shadowy patches. Everything was in disrepair. At that moment, Diren, along with his steward and bodyguard, arrived at Dedren. Seeing the condition of the place, Diren was taken aback, while the steward unrolled a parchment to report the situation. "The security is terrible, and compared to Grake, this place is like a garbage heap. Although the largest criminal organization has been disbanded, many other groups are trying to take its place, and the situation is reverting to its previous state. The military isn't even patrolling." The steward pointed ahead and said, "You should see for yourself." When they entered the barracks, the sight before them was unbelievable. Soldiers were drinking, gambling, and lazing around inside. without a care that someone had opened the door. Only the captain made a half-hearted excuse that this didn't usually happen. But even he rushed to kick over the gambling soldiers, ordering them to clean up. Seeing the chaos and lack of discipline, Diren was utterly dismayed. He had no idea where to start or what to do to address these massive problems. The next morning, the dawn light filtered through the clouds and shone directly into the windows of the Archmage's restaurant. Cheers rang out. "It's done. Doesn't it look great?" Linte, now wearing a chef's outfit, placed a steak on a plate, excitedly shouting as he served it to Ellison and Ruren to taste. The steak was indeed very good. The colors and cooking were perfect. Ellison couldn't help but marvel at Linte's cooking skills. It's clear that Linte is more suited for cooking than farming. Ruren, on the other hand, stared at the steak and confidently declared, "I can cook just as well as this." Linte and Ellison both paused, knowing full well Ruren's cooking abilities. Ellison bluntly stated, "No, you can't." This made Ruren furious, and she yelled, "Have you even tasted my cooking?" Ellison calmly replied, "Linte has. Surely, you remember Ruren's cooking disaster when she had to take over the kitchen while Ellison was sick. It was nothing short of catastrophic." While the two argued in the kitchen, out in the dining hall, people were discussing the arrival of young Lord Diren to take over Dedren. Mr. Knoll, the butcher shop owner, chewed on some meat and said, "The young lord has really made a name for himself. But it seems like he's in for a tough time." No surprise. Just look at the state of Dedren. Just as the conversation was unfolding, the door of the restaurant suddenly swung open. The young lord of Dedren stumbled in. His body weary, he dragged himself to a table, collapsing under the surprised gaze of everyone present. In the kitchen, Ellison asked Ruren, "Who ordered the hamburger?" Ruren flatly replied, "A dead man." "What?" Ellison asked again, confused when the hamburger was brought out. Diren immediately snatched it up, shoving it into his mouth and devouring it ravenously. Clearly, he was both starving and exhausted. Ignoring all the usual noble decorum and eating messily. "This is delicious. Really hits the spot," he said between bites. Those around him began to worry as they watched their young lord act so strangely. Ellison asked Diren about his work, noticing how his complexion reflected the overwhelming stress and difficulty he was dealing with. He offered, "Is there anything I can do to help you?" At this, Diren's eyes suddenly brightened. He started to eat more slowly and began to recount his story. But before he could utter a word, he hesitated, reminding himself that he couldn't always rely on his master to solve every problem. He had to handle things on his own. Ellison, with his keen insight, immediately sensed that something was wrong but patiently waited for Diren's answer. The young man, lost in thought, tried to say, "I'm fine, I just came by because I was craving the food here." But his mouth betrayed him, blurting out, "Yes, I'm dying here, please, help me."